Manu, I'm writing to you because right now you're probably the only person I can trust to keep me sane. You know better than anyone that I've never been the kind to believe in ghost stories. Our family always loved them, but I dismissed them as nonsense. So, please remember that about me and trust what I'm about to tell you. I'm asking you to believe me only because of the deep trust one have in you. Because honestly, even I can barely believe my own words as I write them. It goes without saying, don't tell anyone else. About a week ago, I got a call from Rogelio, an old classmate you might remember. For months now, he's been producing a radio show about legends and ghost stories. He told me he needed a huge favor, and that I'd have to keep it absolutely secret. That same night, I met with him at his place. There were a few others there. Lino, the host of the show, Damian, his assistant, Carlos Camarina, a priest and a close friend of Rogelio, and of course me. They caught me up on the situation. For days, their show had been receiving calls from a woman named Carmen. She kept begging for help, saying her daughter Carolina was possessed. At first, neither Rogelio nor Lino believed her. They just thought it was filler content. A desperate mother confusing some mental illness with demonic possession. But the calls kept coming, night after night, and soon they could hear Carolina herself through the phone. Her voice would shift mid-sentence into something completely different. Sometimes she even spoke in languages none of them could recognize. Naturally, they were thrilled, thinking they'd stumbled on a goldmine for boosting their ratings. To them, it was just a mentally ill girl who had watched too many horror movies. That was their belief, until last Friday. At almost 11 p.m., as usual, the phone rang. But this time, it wasn't Carmen. It was the girl. And her voice? Calm, mocking. Told them they wouldn't be hearing from her mother anymore. Rogelio, who was at the controls, froze in fear. Lino too. For the first time, they felt guilty, thinking they had ignored a real cry for help, that maybe they had been exploiting a mentally unstable girl for the sake of ratings. But they didn't have much time to reflect. The studio lights suddenly went out. A strange noise echoed through the speakers. Terrible chill filled the room. When the lights came back and the equipment flickered on, every phone line was ringing. Listeners reported that just after the broadcast cut off, they heard laughter mixed with screams. Horrible, piercing screams that lasted nearly a full minute. Some callers were terrified. Others were furious, convinced it was all a hoax. On air, Lino tried to calm everyone down, asking listeners to pray for the poor woman and her daughter. The rest of the program went on without any more ghost stories. The next morning, they tried to call Carmen's house. She answered, relieved to hear them, and even gave them her address in Rosarito so they could visit. When they arrived, she broke down crying, thanking them for coming. She insisted she had only made the very first call, weeks ago. Then, suddenly, a scream came from her daughter's room. The scream shook the whole house. Rogelio and Lino told me later what it was like to step into that room. But to be honest, I didn't keep many of the details in my mind. At that moment, I was more worried about what these guys had been smoking to actually believe a story like this, and worse, to come to me asking for help. Maybe you're thinking the same thing right now. But believe me, this was only the beginning. Carmen, desperate, ran out to find her pastor, who lived just a few blocks away. Meanwhile, Rogelio rushed back toward Tijuana to bring Father Carlos. By the time they returned, the house was in chaos. Carmen was sobbing hysterically, her dress stained with red. The pastor lay on the floor, clutching a rag completely soaked in blood from his nose. Lino, dripping with sweat, sat by the door of Carolina's room, as if trying to hold it shut. When Father Carlos entered the room, everything went strangely quiet. He stayed inside for about 5 minutes. Then he came out and simply asked to be taken back to Tijuana. He spent the rest of Saturday making phone calls. Rogelio and Lino no longer cared about their next radio program. The following morning, Sunday, around 10, they finally got a call back from Father Carlos. He told them the bishop had granted authorization. They were to bring the girl immediately to the cathedral. So Rogelio, Lino, and Damian, along with Father Carlos and 2 parish workers, drove out to Carmen's house. When they arrived, Carmen seemed to be expecting them. She's been screaming with a horrible man's voice, she said, trembling. Since around 10 o'clock this morning. She's been floating in her room. The house looked like it had been shaken by an earthquake. Carolina was sitting in her room, smiling. She said she was ready to go with them. They took every precaution, but strangely, she remained calm and quiet the entire trip. It was only once they reached the cathedral that things grew unnerving again. Carolina began to laugh, whispering under her breath as if sharing a private joke with someone, like a child proud of a prank no one else could understand. By this point, I was starting to believe more and more of their story. Rogelio must have noticed the shift in me, because he said quietly, "This was just yesterday. Father Carlos has been with her all day today. But we're going to need a specialist. A doctor we can really trust. And that has to be you." Like an idiot, I agreed. And worse, I added, "I want to see her tonight. Right away." They exchanged glances. Father Carlos finally nodded. Rogelio, Lino, and Damian had to rush back to the radio station. They were almost late for the evening broadcast. Father Carlos got into my car, and we drove toward the cathedral. It was only 10 at night, but the streets seemed darker than usual. Empty. Every corner looked like it hid moving shadows. At each stoplight, I felt as if someone had walked right up to my window, standing just out of sight. Father Carlos noticed the tension in me. He leaned closer and whispered, "I feel it too, Mariano. May God have mercy on us." When we reached the cathedral, the silence inside was heavy, almost unnatural. The air felt colder than the streets outside, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Father Carlos led me through the dim corridors, his steps slow, deliberate. I could hear faint noises ahead, laughter, then whispers, then what sounded like claws scraping against stone. My stomach tightened with each step. Finally, we reached the chamber. Carolina was there. She sat on the floor, her eyes locked on us before we even entered, as though she had been waiting. Her lips curled into a smile that didn't belong on a child's face. "Doctor," she said in a voice that was not her own, deep, resonant, mocking. "Finally, they told me you would come." I froze. I hadn't introduced myself. No one had. Her body trembled, but it wasn't weakness. It was rage contained, like a storm pressing against the walls of a fragile cage. Then, in the same breath, she spoke in a dozen tongues. Latin, German, something older that I couldn't recognize. Voices overlapping, echoing, as if there were several beings inside her throat. Father Carlos gripped his crucifix so tightly I thought it might break. "Stay back," he whispered. But she laughed. A sound that shook the room, sharp and piercing, like glass shattering inside my skull. And then the impossible happened. Her body lifted, slowly, gracefully, as though invisible hands held her up. Her hair floated around her head. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites remained. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. "Do you believe now?" she hissed. Her voice multiplied, layered with echoes. "Do you believe me, doctor?" I could barely breathe. My heart hammered in my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt true fear. Not the kind you shake off, but the kind that seeps into your bones and never lets go. Carolina's body fell suddenly to the floor with a sickening thud. She didn't move. The chamber was silent, the air thick with the smell of smoke, though no fire burned. Father Carlos turned to me, his face pale, his eyes wet. He whispered, "This is only the beginning."